But when I look at spirituality, both in individuals and congregations, I look at this and there's always extremes, and they're not always negative, there's not always bad. But like for example, the Word of Solomon, on the right-hand side, there are some people who have a very structured spirituality. I was just talking to a friend yesterday. He's up every morning at 6 o'clock. He has a prayer list. He does very specific things. I have several things that are involved with that. On the other hand, in doing some projects, I talked with a lot of older preachers and missionaries, and an older generation wasn't nearly as structured. Like, for example, one man said, I keep 2 Bibles on my desk over to different places, and at different times of the day, with phone calls, I read those, and I think of my spirituality is going all day long. I don't think that is something I do from 6 to 7. So they're not negative, but some people will have a very, very structured spirituality. Some will be, I use the term unstructured, but it's not that they're not spiritual, but they're not as when I was an Oklahoma Christian, I read a tract called Manna in the Morning, and you can hear the sound of the lights. Every day has a different thing to pray for, and I've done this for years and years. Monday, M was missionaries, so pray for missionaries on Monday. T for Tuesday's tasks, things that we're doing. W for Wednesday are workers, fellow workers who I'm working with. And so in my case, I start at the church office and go with different guys, go around the table with the elders. So Monday's missionaries, Tuesday's task, Wednesday is fellow workers. My favorite is Thursday, TH. Could we have one day of Thanksgiving and not ask God for anything for one day? Thursday's my favorite. Now, if something comes up, God's not going to be upset with you, please tell him. But as a goal, I try to have one day where, at least for the most part, I just try to say thank you rather than please. Friday, FA is family. Pray for things to do with family, extended family. Saturday is the day for saints. And I especially pray on Saturday for the delinquent boys. Going through the years, I've just met and worked with a lot of guys who aren't in school today. So it can be a lot of people, but especially I pray for those Saturday on the saints. Sunday, a day of prayer for sinners. A blessing for God's people to be together, and how many people can we bring out of darkness to bring into the kingdom of light. What I like about that is that sometimes we spend more time deciding what to do than doing something. And you can just ask Todd, sometimes on Monday morning, we're just emotionally drained. Tell my wife to like leave the lights in the car overnight, the battery got to go. But a lot of times on Monday, I think, okay, Monday's missionaries. Obviously, with dear friends in Australia, we started in Sydney, praying those missionaries. So I can be more structured than unstructured, but look at the contrast in that type of spirituality. The same thing is true. Monastic is a little bit overused for what I want to say, but it still is important. Some people think of spirituality primarily as an individual. What am I going to do? You know, and you're going to hear Joshua as for me in my house. That's a very valid thing. Other people, and I haven't thought about this as much, they think of their spirituality primarily in terms of their community. What can I do functioning in the body, both to be with, to do with, to encourage? I listened to a guy, he was in the Surrey area, and Kent Wildwood's there and other stuff. And there was an elder that he just done this dozens of times. He would come to someone and say, God needs us to. And they would ask the person to go help him to do that. God needs us to. And then would recruit to get them to help. And so some people are going to think of spirituality primarily in terms of relationships. There's a whole set of things here. If you just notice the word Friedman, which is the first one and the third one, this is totally in the counseling. It's not directly in the church work. Jew. But he worked in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area, and there were all these international people that came and went. And as he kept working with people, he noticed sometimes we think we've got to get mom, dad, and the kids together, but he said one person can impact the relationship of all the other people if they have a very clear idea of what they're doing. Let me say the same thing in another way. At different times, all of us as Christians will find ourselves in a dysfunctional situation. Maybe the church, could be at work, could be a social club or something. And one of the things that Friedman worked on is how he made a sense of spiritual healthiness as you're dealing with all the other stuff going on around you. And so, the second one, S-T-E-I-N-K, thinking, and I have 3 of his books here. He just has a little book on healthy congregations. And we're not going to have time for all the details, but when you see the term systems approach, several of these will be involved with this. And all that they're talking about is what can we do as individuals to maintain a sense of healthiness, because at different times all of us will deal with difficult situations. Case in point. The people told Joshua, we will serve you just like we did Moses. And like Joshua, I run for the nearest hill. Why have you brought us out here? What are we going to eat? You have brought us out here to die. And here's the technical term, and faces will come to mind when I use this. At the heart of working with the systems theory is how you deal with the chronically anxious. Without being technical, if I use the word chronically anxious, what words come to mind? Help me. Chronically anxious people are worrisome. What?
It's a constant worry all the time.
Pessimistic, physically stressed, and they are never happier until they make other people as stressed as they are, because why aren't you as worried about this as I am? A calm presence is one of the strongest antidotes for the chronically anxious. Why does God want an elder to be an older man who's spiritually mature, has raised a family? You see what I'm saying? When I started reading this, I heard of chronically anxious. Just a whole group of people came to mind. And so, we're just going to do let me do one other thing while we're here. This is a website that's down at the very bottom. Carlos Gutman has taught in 2 of our Christian schools. Every time he's either taught a class or taken a class, he has kept the bibliography. And here's one of those. You can go to lifeleadership.com. There'll be 40 or 50 subjects. And it depends. There could be 12 to 20 to 30 resources under each one of those topics. So if you're just looking for a good place to go and see a broad section of different types of material to look at, then Carlos got to lifeleadership.com. And here at the church, but it's a very diverse thing. Another thing, if you've never done this, and it's from the Denver Seminary, that at one time was conservative Baptist, but it's still evangelical. If you go to Denver Seminary and go up to resources, they do an online journal. And you look at an online journal, there's a whole list. They'll do Bible background, geography, on and on. But they will do Old Testament and New Testament. Let's do New Testament. There are at least 3 people that pick 12, in their mind, of the leading commentaries on that book. And being an online journal, if something comes out they really like, they go in and delete it. They don't have to print that. So like right now we're doing Romans. Every time I do a class at church, I go to that, and the first three will be a little more Greek, the middle ones will be a little bit technical background, the bottom ones are application. And I like people who just do this for a living, and they're just suggestions, but different seminary resources, and I'm always looking at Old Testament, New Testament bibliography, because these are people who study and read and look at this all the time. Okay, back to the front page. Central idea, paradox. Provide a roadmap for action in specific circumstances, and to describe a planned response to different situations in a local church. And this was really helpful in with Sneaky coming from the church, background, broader church, not Church of Christ, but broader church. He looked at this and he said, in every church, there's a triangle. And let me start at the top. One of the things I like to talk to our interns about when they come to North Mac is every church has we call it the DNA. Just hearing that, what comes to mind? Every church has a DNA. Personality, makeup. It could be we survived the split. You know, I'm talking just there's a dozen other things. And every time you come to a certain church, that's just the nature of an organism, a background. The importance of that, well, let me say it this way. We had a youth guy with us for 13 years, Clay Bryant, who's now in Weatherford. Young guy, but he would go to a youth ministry conference, he'd come back and he would say, this is a really good idea, but does this fit our DNA? It's not often that a 20-year-old is that receptive. We've all seen someone say, this is a great idea, but it just doesn't fit that particular group. My rural elders in Mississippi would go crazy in Midwest City with employees of the federal government with their job descriptions and everything because farmers didn't operate that way. So every church has a part of the personality, but as you look at it, then there are individual families that make up the church, and the nature of those families will determine a lot of the DNA of the local congregation. In the Sayre Church, there's been somebody either in the Thurman, if you do gospel minutes, Dillard, Clem, those guys, they all originally came from Sayre. But there's been somebody either in the Thurman family or the Hartman family in the eldership since the 1940s. And our cousin Glenn may be the last one. But you stop and think, that has a lot to do with the individual families. The makeup of that are really, really important. The other side is the leaders' families. And they can be elders, but they also can be, I use the term opinion leaders. When we moved to Mississippi, her name was just Grandma House. Everybody called her Grandma House. She was bedfast in her 80s. And this literally makes my head hurt. She had taught a one-room school for 40 years. She did ABC to algebra every day. She had dozens and dozens of students who graduated from Ole Miss and Mississippi State who had one teacher by the time they got to university. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it just makes my head hurt. Until I had a stroke, I read every word of the Wall Street Journal every day just so I would know what was going on in the world. It's not your average school teacher. Well, I had a big Parliament in my home when he was doing meetings in Mississippi. This lady was one of the most influential people in the church, and when I was there, she was bedfast. But you see what I'm saying? Leaders are elders, but there's also leaders in a church that have a profound influence on that. We had two bedfast ladies. The first one, the world's going to the dogs, it's dark, it's bad. And I quickly found out I never went to see Sister Everything is Awful until I could drive straight to Grandma House's house wrong? She said, well, since I've had my stroke, every afternoon, I lay here and I put all the books of the Bible in order. And today I can't remember if the book of Habakkuk came before or after the fall of Jerusalem. And I won't be able to sleep tonight if I can't figure that out. Can you imagine someone in their mid-80s who had a stroke who's going to lose sleep over whether the book of Habakkuk came before or after the fall of Jerusalem? And I said, well, I think I know. Let me get my text out. I just wanted to be sure. And then I told her, well, he's before because Jeremiah and Zephaniah and Habakkuk are asking those questions. And here it is. Your last three, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, your last three minor prophets are after the fall of Jerusalem. Smile came back. She was Grandma House again. And she said, thank you. I will be able to go to sleep tonight. An 85-year-old woman was the spiritual heartbeat of a local congregation. So you see what I'm talking about in terms of relationships and how things function within a local church. We've already done the BLD. Like I said, this will come up a couple of times. That has just been really, really helpful to me because, again, elder, minister, but I'm just saying member. All of us will have situations where things have taken place. And I have a wonderful brother-in-law. He was a supervisor at Will Rogers. He would run the radar and stuff. His wife had died, had liver cancer and stuff. Well, when Richard came to the tower, just as a Christian, he said, well, let's take up a fund, and either when someone dies or something happens, as fellow workers, let's take it. And several of these people didn't go to church, they'd never done that. Oh, what a good idea. Well, they had done that 5 or 6 times. His wife dies, he's not even thinking about it. There's a knock on the door, and here are some of his fellow workers with some things from the fund because he had already initiated that and started that, and he had started that kind of let's look after, let's help, let's serve culture in the group. And then lo and behold, unlike the end when his wife died, then she came in was a major part of it. I'm going to summarize it, and this is something I work a lot with acronyms. When I deal with you have got to do something, or you wouldn't believe what so-and-so said. And if you've been in any kind of leadership, you don't even have to be in leadership, but if you've been in any kind of leadership, there are chronically anxious people in every church. I had a football coach would say they would be happy if you hung me with a do-rug. Terrible expression, but just, it's never going to be quite right. There's always something else to do. But when I came across this term, chronically anxious, I thought, that just describes a whole group of people. I was in a church where 2 women and a man, and we're going to be using the term triangle here, 2 women and a man had dirt on each other, and every fellowship they watched the others like a hawk to see who they were talking to see if they might be talking about something that they kind of shared in confidence. When I found out what was going on, it was tragic. And every time they got together, this process was always going on. So, both in terms of dealing with the chronically anxious, but also to keep as healthy of an environment as possible, here's my word KISS. The first one is just the idea of the word know yourself. And what's significant about that is that all of us have certain responses to things because of how we've been raised. And we're going to look at something later, which is a very organized way to look at that. But the more you know about yourself, the better you can deal with a difficult situation. Okay, this is hard to say, and if my mom hadn't passed away, I wouldn't say this. Probably from when I was 12, maybe until I died, at times my mom wasn't mentally well, and my mom was convinced that both I was on drugs and was a drug dealer. We're on vacation, and she will not do until we take everything out of the truck, we take the back seats out, we look at the spare store drugs somewhere in the car while we're on vacation. Okay? I wouldn't even drink Dr. Pepper during football season. Why am I doing drugs? And if you've never done something, but your mom is convinced that you are, you have grown up under a microscope, and an older preacher was talking with me, he said, well, it's unfortunate your mom is that way, but a lot of times God is preparing you to deal with things later through things that you learn to deal with when you're younger. I'm 36 years old, have been in Sydney for 10 years. Mom comes for a visit. Mom, I need to drop this book at the Sydney University. I've got to take 2 buses and a train. If you'll stay right here, I'll run do that. I'll come back and we'll go home. We get home that night and she says to my wife, okay, I'm 36 years old, missionary for 10 years. My mom said to my wife, he said he was delivering books, but I know he was really doing a drug drop and he didn't want me there. And I want to say, yes, Mom, the missionary work's just a drug drop. And, you know, I moved half around the world just so I could deal with cocaine now, but, you know, and at some point you can just get so frustrated. But here's why I'm saying this. I'm already oblivious to criticism because if my own mother thinks I'm on drugs, if you don't like my preaching, that doesn't really compare to my own mother. 3 times I've had someone say, I think you are the worst preacher I have ever heard in my life. I congratulate them for their perceptiveness. And I tell them the trying of your faith works with patience. And if you're struggling to listen to my sermon has developed Christian character, I really appreciate the godliness that you've developed while you've suffered listening to me preach. My wife says you're sick. I'm not going to change their mind. And as the middle daughter, our attorney says, Dad, they put their quarter in the contribution plate. They can be part of the peanut gallery and say whatever they want to. And so when people say something, I will listen. Sometimes God will be telling you something through a critic that your friends won't tell you. But I'm not going to take it to heart because my mother died thinking I'm a drug dealer. You see what I'm talking about? We are all influenced by certain things that have happened to us. And the more we know about that core, both in terms of our family and our history, that impacts how I respond in a given situation. There were also 3 different times the elders said, this is going to be really crazy, this is going to be some people really upset, there's going to be some people crying. Would you please go in and kind of monitor and be the spokesman for us in dealing with this? I oftentimes think that eldership is a partnership. And like for example, we built a building like this at Eastside. One of our elders, his dad was an electrical contractor. None of us knew any of the details. Chuck White came in, knew the blueprints, that elder could be. So within an eldership, we should build the strengths that we have. But the K is, the more I know about myself, the better I can deal with certain situations. And guys, here's something really, really important. An unguarded strength is our greatest weakness. An unguarded strength is our greatest weakness. I've had 4 brothers that I heard say, well, I would never do that. And guess what happened? Because that wasn't a strength, and they just assumed, well, I don't have to be careful about that. And so knowing yourself is really, really important. The I, we're all human, and we're not going to do everything right in every situation. But here's what to me is really important. To the best of our ability, act with integrity. Jesus says, I always do what pleases Him. And here's what's important, both within and without the eldership. Let me do this, but how many of us are elders? Okay. Let's talk to those of us who aren't elders just for a second, and let me explain what I'm saying. There are always situations that our elders know details that none of the rest of us know. couple, and they were just the model. I mean, both of them looked like they stepped out of a fashion magazine, beautiful people, on and on. We found out later, and I didn't know this initially, he had told her, we are never having kids. I guess and he worked in the school. So he worked with kids all day long and didn't want any kids at home. She became pregnant, and that night he went out and slept with someone else. She came to the elders about 3 months into the pregnancy, and for 6 months the elders counseled, they prayed with them, they worked with them, they did everything they could to hold this little family together. And get ready. When she went to the hospital to have a baby, he had arranged for a mover to come and move all of his stuff out of the house. He was not at the hospital, he didn't see the baby, and she came home with the baby to a house that was half empty, and all of his stuff was gone. Did the elders succeed as being shepherds of that family? I say yes, that they did everything humanly possible to hold that family together. What if that had become information for the whole church during that 6 months they would probably have split before? Having done everything they could, they didn't control the decision of that. And this is heartbreaking. 6 months later, she went forward and she says, I've been loved, I've been cared for, but I have so many scars being here, I'm going to need to worship in another church. I commended the elders because before God, they had done the right thing, but so much of what was going on, they were the only ones that knew about that. And so, to the best of our ability, we need to have transparency. I understand that. But here's what's important. We started working with the church, and after 6 months, my wife said, please don't tell me any more than I have to know. Because I was exactly what I'm talking about. Here's the negative. I worked with an elder once, and this was their family policy. They said, we have no secrets in our house. And so after every elders meeting, he went home and did a recitation of verses, everything that happened in the elders meeting to his wife. What happens if you drink water out of a vessel that's had poison in it, even if you washed it out? And I use the word residue poisoning. At a point in time, this lady couldn't speak to certain members of the church because she was privy to inside things from the elders meeting that from my point of view, she should never have known about. So here's the two sides. And for those of you who aren't elders, and if any of the elders want to comment when I finish, I'm open to that. There are some things that we protect our wife and our family and the whole church that they should never know about. There are some things that happen in an elders meeting that we're going to be prayerful, we're going to do the best thing we can, but we're going to try to act with integrity. But, having said that, to have this any chance to succeed, no one else can know at this point except the elders. Here's the other side. Sheila, if something major is about to happen, and if you need to know this to protect yourself, I'm going to tell you this in confidence before it happens. Song leader, deacon, founding band member of a wonderful school program is being brought up on molestation charges with his granddaughter that he had been keeping. Husband and wife are going to talk with me on Monday. We go talk with the elders on Wednesday. He's going to resign on Sunday, and there may be TV cameras from Channel 4 and Channel 9 at church on Sunday. Every elder's wife, every staff member, and every staff member's wife need to know that that's going to happen on Sunday to protect them. to deal with this, we talked with Don Van Zandt, and they had a situation in Edmond, and he said, and as the man went forward, we asked for prayers, for forgiveness. He ends up in prison before it's all done. But Don Van Zandt said, we appointed one media spokesman, and if anybody comes with a camera and a microphone, tell the whole church, in this case it was my son, that you need to go talk to Luke Hartman. Todd, why does the church want to have one media spokesman for the TV networks?
Because you don't want certain things out of the laundry, you don't very laundry out of the one. Number two, you need one person to have one voice to know what to say or what not to say. And it's expected these things, is somebody that's in the office or just talks too much.
And then see, if people have just heard this, they're hurt, I can't believe this happened, and on, and then you stick a microphone in their face. You see what I'm saying with acting with integrity? And so in a situation like that, and I visited him while he was in prison, bless her heart, his wife said, I said for better or for worse. The two boys said, you know, leave me, and she said no. We brought you to the world, but I said for better or worse, and she stayed with him. He did the very best he could when he got out. But you see what I'm talking about in terms of acting with integrity? That was a situation where, and we talked about this on Wednesday night, in front of the couple, then we need to let the secretaries know, we need to let each of our wives know, and while it wasn't generally known across the congregation, if he's gonna go forward on Sunday, and we may have television cameras there, we need to do everything we can to minimize the damage that's due to the church, but we also need to honor the fact that he's repenting of this and ask God to work with us in that situation. So for those of us who aren't elders, unless our elders are acting unscripturally, which is very, very seldom, we need to be supportive of our elders, and that there are times they have to make decisions and do things that for the good of us, none of the rest of us know all the details of why this is happening.
Something else, as a young minister, I'm sure there were times when my elders shielded me from things that I didn't need to know or didn't need to hear with regard to me or my family or just other things that I wasn't good enough or ready enough to do. And I appreciate that as I look back now, I appreciate that to this school. And good elders do that too. They don't know what to tell them.
Yeah. Now, here's the other side, and this is both in terms of staff and elders. There are times that it's very appropriate to talk to our wife and say, from your point of view, both as a woman and on Noah, what are your thoughts about the best thing to do? That's totally different than what we just talked about. And I'm sorry, this is terrible. I have a friend who's a little bit cynical, and he said the reason that the Pope has to be single is that if he was married, his wife would have to tell people about his faults. Our wives know us better than anybody else. And so there are some things, this is how we have worked this out. Two sides. Number one, I will protect you from things that you don't need to know until it comes to the point that you need to know this for your own security. And then on the other hand, there are a whole group of things that we can share, we can talk about, and having her input and her point of view is just absolutely priceless. It's a great value. And as often as possible, we try to do things together, but all those have to do with the importance of acting with integrity. Either elders, anything you want to toss in or say?
Well, I think first off, you have two speakers. You could have some contradictions. It'd be better if you had, like for us, let's agree with the thought. One guy would say what needs to be said, and then that'd be it. There wouldn't be this, do that. It'd be one entity.
Yes. And we'll talk about this a little bit when we get back to elders. You go through all these different characters, he's blameless in all of these things. But then he said, within the eldership, the most single important term that he is not self-willed. And I've been in two of these. One was at Midwest City. One doctrinal, matter of opinion, but 5 elders said yes, and Bob said no. I don't think that's a good idea. So respectfully, they said, well, let's pray about this for a week, we'll decide next Sunday. And again, this wasn't doctrinal, it was matter of opinion. And these 5 guys said yes. Bob still said, I think this is a bad idea. And the others respectfully said, well, we need to do that. So here it came. Bob said, well, this is the guy who's against it. Since we have decided to do this, then I'm the one that needs to give the announcement on Sunday. So only the people in the elders meeting do this, but the elder who was against it got up next Sunday, and you would have thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. You would have thought this was the elders have decided, and the elders want you to do, how can he do that? He wasn't self-willed. And that's really important in terms of the functioning within the eldership, and that's also part of the respect that we have for each other. And my younger brother is the epitome of evangelism and outgoingness and meeting people, and he is just, well, he works at Oklahoma Christian, he knows more people by name than anybody there. So we worked together for 8 years with either 1 or 2 guys. Not one time was it the 2 brothers against the other one. If there was a difference, being the older, mature, stable brother, then I would propose that we do this. And then my younger, frivolous, junior brother would say, let's do this. And we're trying to pull the guys in the middle each way. But here's the bottom line. If we decide to go the other way, these guys have a good brain. I would have done it that way, but I'm going to support what we have decided to do, and that's how things can work. So when you look at the second one, the third one, Dylan, give me that one. The third one is self-differentiate, and this is again part of knowing yourself. Let me just go back to that comment I made earlier. It's the easiest way to say this. Well, let me do it the wrong way. Some people, anytime they're criticized, become so offended that one of the expressions I heard is that they take their bat ball and go home. And, like for example, our youngest daughter is a marriage and family therapist. And one of the things that a counselor has to learn to do is to withhold their emotions and their feelings for what the other person is going through, to allow that person time and process to do that. And if you get too emotionally involved yourself, it's not going to help the other person. And self-differentiation is the ability to separate just your point of view and just your perspective, and in some cases just your feelings, from the overall context of what's going on. I did 2 of my children's weddings, and in the case of my son, I wrote 2 services that I really liked, but I wouldn't be able to get through because of emotion. If you've done a funeral, especially these people like your own relatives, at some point you have to separate your emotions and your feelings from the circumstances to say what needs to be said and to serve the people and to get through to do that. This isn't just a matter of being thin-skinned and thick-skinned, but one of my dear friends, Chuck White, third base coach in baseball, he said, I just figured that half the people in the stands are going to be upset with whichever way I go. If I send the guy home and he gets thrown out, I'm being reckless. If I don't send him and we strike out, then I'm not wanting to win what's important within, and this is true with elders, deacons, leaders, our biggest priority is not to get people to like us. And second, our biggest priority is not to keep people happy. Our biggest priority is to do the Lord's work in such a way that it brings glory and honor to Him. What happens if I'm always at the mercy of the majority of the chronically anxious of a congregation? Hear what I'm trying to say? Well, what happens if I primarily make my decisions in terms of, well, now what is Sister so-and-so going to think? And this is to me a really critical area, and again, it's part of the system theory. Self-differentiation says, I do the very best I can, but I try to weigh things up, I try to look at the circumstances, and to make a decision as rationally as possible without allowing either just my emotions or especially the chronically anxious to cause me to do this. I can think of two majority decisions that were strong majority decisions in the Bible that ended up as being disasters. How many of the 12 spies said, we can do this? You hear the chronically anxious? Oh, we were like grasshoppers, And once you hear that term, chronically anxious, you'll see it over and over again. And the majority said, we can't do this. And so what are the consequences? Oh, we wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and then the whole generation dies. This is a terrible storm. Wintertime is coming. Should we go on? And the majority said we should sail to the next port. And what happened to the bags? There's a shipwreck. So you can see both as minister, missionary, and elder. This self-differentiation says, to the best of our ability, understanding God's word, we try to do the best thing for the most people that's within the will of God, and not be led primarily either by the peanut gallery or by the chronically anxious. Everybody okay? The second S is to stay out of triangles. The chronically anxious are never happy to just be anxious themselves. They're always going to be talking to and through and about someone else. And I'm back to the man and the two women who all knew things about each other. One of the ladies had a son in another country and didn't tell her son and daughter until they were 34 and 32 years old that they had a half-brother. How would you like to be 34 years old and your mom says, well, by the way, your half-brother from New Zealand is coming to spend Christmas with us. And you've been in this house for 34 years and that's the first time you hear about it. Well, that was part of what was known. And so each of the people in the triangle had some deep, dark secret. And so they just looked at each other like hawks all the time because they were always worried about that. How many times do elders hear something that someone sent someone else to tell them? And so here's the deal, and how scriptural is this? Someone comes and says, oh, so-and-so and so-and-so, da-da-da-da. Guess what is the first thing I ask them? Have you gone and talked to that person yourself? It's amazing how many situations that diffuses. Let me give the negatives. Bless his heart. I worked with an elder that had previously been the mayor of the city for 10 years. And all you had to do is give him a hint about somebody said or somebody did or something, there like a shot as an elder to get him straightened out. And guess what the chronically anxious did all the time? They fed him stuff, and he just, as an elder, he went to get this straightened out. And what would have happened if he had said, oh, have you talked to Sister so-and-so about that yourself? I have a brother-in-law who is pun, dad jokes, on and on it goes. He just lives for that. And even before he starts telling jokes, sometimes you just start shaking your head. Well, we moved to East Side, we're getting ready to go to Australia. He's at some kind of a function or a party. And there's a girl there from our congregation from East Side. Just stirring the pot, he said, you wouldn't believe what I know about Dale Hartman, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. To which she said, I go to the same church he goes to. If you don't have anything good to say about it, I don't want to talk to you. So 3 times he tried to talk to her and say, I'm just teasing, and she wouldn't even let him get close to her. So see what happens. This person talking to another person about the third person. Once you start thinking about the chronically anxious, then you start watching in a group of people, church included, how often, primarily, the chronically anxious function through triangles rather than face-to-face interaction. I want to pause for a second. Thoughts, comments, observations?
Dale, where do you want to stop?
Let's just do this very bottom part, and then let's take a stop. Know yourself. I always try to come with integrity. First is self-differentiate. I'm not going to get personally offended. I try to process that you tell me whatever I need to hear without me becoming offended. Get my nose out of joint. Stay out of triangles. And we've already said this, Lord's Church before we came, all we're here after. Doing things to the praise of God's glory is our highest motivation. And again, if you knew me, this is going to sound wrong, but it's still true. I don't think of myself as trying to be in a church to keep people happy. Because if I'm trying to keep people happy, I'm always subject to chronically anxious. And we have changed church services. If you would just do this, this, or this, we have done that several times, and the person still didn't come. And it's amazing how that frees you when you say, we're going to try to do the best thing we can for the most people. Well, let me say it this way. We had a dear friend that has 4 boys. And growing up, she said, as your mother, I am here not to keep you happy, I'm here to get you to heaven. I'm not here to be your chauffeur, I'm not here just to be your cook, I'm not here to wash your clothes, I'm not here just at your beck and call. As your mother, I'm here to get you to heaven. There's something that is liberating and free when, rather than primarily doing this and seeing if everyone's going to be happy, we say, I'm going to try to do the best we can, do the right thing at the right time, be faithful to God's word, but I'm not here to try to keep people happy. Let's touch on this and then we'll take a break. Less than 30% of the leaders in the Bible finished well. Can I say the same thing? More than 70% of the leaders in the Bible did not finish well. And we'll come back and touch and talk on that for again. But he said, rather than just being a human being, I think God is my partner. And if I fold my hand, I may not give God the opportunity to trump the poor hand that I got. Translate. We've all played 42, played hearts or something, have a terrible hand, and guess what? Our partner has all the things that can help us to do that. So he did it on this analogy. He said, as you're dealing with struggles, with difficult things in life, be very careful about folding your hand. Because if you do, you didn't give God the chance to trump the poor hand that you got. And he may have been doing that to help develop character in you in the meantime. Dylan, call for